When I was young, I thought success was a simple mix of talent and persistence. My father, a quiet but relentless man, ran a modest hardware store in our sleepy town. His words stuck with me. Son, a person isn't measured by how high they climb, but by how they handle the ground beneath them. That belief shaped my work ethic, but I hadn't yet learned how life twists those ideals. By the time I stepped into the world of advertising, I had nothing but a degree and blind optimism. The city was overwhelming, fast, cutthroat, full of opportunity but quick to swallow you whole. Those early years blurred into sleepless nights, brutal deadlines, and the painful realization that ambition wasn't enough. Every client meeting felt like a trial, every campaign a battlefield. Despite my missteps, I found myself drawn to mentors who had seemingly cracked the code of success, none more fascinating than the legendary H. Whitaker Worrell. It had been years since I last saw him. That evening, I was at a downtown bar, waiting for my girlfriend, when I unexpectedly ran into him. Once, I had the chance to work at his firm, Worrell, Hanson, and Associates, but in my arrogance, I chose a different path. Looking back, I wondered, had I made a mistake? He greeted me warmly and took a seat across from me. We shook hands, exchanged pleasantries. HW had always struck me as a solid guy, the kind of boss I might have actually enjoyed working for. Had I joined his firm, maybe my career would have been smoother. No betrayals, no messy business ventures. Instead, I ended up at a lackluster agency, which later led me to co-found Carter and Calloway Advertising with Ryan Calloway, once my closest friend, later my biggest adversary. For context, I'm Ethan Carter, formerly co-owner of Carter and Calloway. As we caught up, HW mentioned he had stepped away from advertising due to heart issues. His partner, Mark Ellison, now ran the firm while he eased into semi-retirement. He was in town visiting his grandkids before catching a flight. Downtown, he figured, was a better way to kill time than sitting in an airport bar. My phone buzzed. My girlfriend was stuck at work. Dinner had to be postponed. I told her I'd wait, maybe have a drink in the meantime. HW, now insisting I call him Henry, gave me a knowing smirk. He had heard about my partnership with Ryan. He wanted to know what went wrong. That was a long, complicated story. Ryan and I had built Carter and Calloway from the ground up. We balanced each other perfectly, me, the ideas guy and writer, him, the perfectionist who brought my concepts to life. I handled the pitches and scripts, while Ryan made sure everything looked right. We met at a failing agency, where we were thrown together to salvage a disastrous ad campaign. Against the odds, we pulled it off, making a fortune for our bosses and realizing we had a unique synergy. When we left to start our own firm, we built a name for ourselves fast, so much so that even major firms sought our advice when their campaigns stalled. Our personal lives were just as intertwined. Ryan married Samantha, and I married Olivia. Our wives grew close, at least, as close as Olivia was capable of being with anyone. She had a way of making everything a competition, whether it was friendships, conversations, or whose husband had the most influence in the industry. Both women were undeniably beautiful. Olivia had golden blonde hair and the kind of effortless charm that she wielded like a weapon when it suited her. Samantha was petite, with jet black hair and a sharp wit that could cut through steel. Ryan and I used to joke that we had somehow lucked out, marrying women far too good-looking for us. Physically, Ryan and I were opposites. He was broad-shouldered, built like a former football player, though too easygoing for contact sports. I was leaner, 5 feet 9 inches, 165 pounds, but I had played college ball. I wasn't the biggest, but I was quick, able to outrun most defenders. For years, everything clicked. The agency thrived. Our friendship stayed strong. Then things changed. Ryan, Samantha, Olivia, and I were inseparable. We spent so much time together, both professionally and personally, that we went in on a lakefront cabin together. We even co-owned a sleek cabin cruiser, the kind of boat that turned heads. But it wasn't just luxury, it made sense. It was designed for four. Then came the weekend that destroyed everything. We had planned a final getaway before summer ended. A weekend at the lake. No work, just relaxation. But a last-minute shakeup changed everything. We were preparing a massive campaign for Hargrove and Sons, set to be pitched the following Thursday. Then, late Thursday night, Franklin Hargrove himself called. Change of plans. He was leaving for Europe and wanted to pitch first thing in the morning. It was a brutal curveball, but if we landed Hargrove, it would be game-changing. The timing couldn't have been worse. The campaign was nearly finished, but we had planned to fine-tune the details next week. Now, There was no next week. Ryan and I pulled an all-nighter. By morning, his graphics were polished, our pitch locked in. Since his part was done, he and Samantha took Olivia to the lake as planned while I stayed behind to make the pitch. If all went well, I'd wrap up by early evening and drive up in time for dinner at the resort's buffet. Franklin Hargrove was infamous for dragging things out. A factory tour, a long lunch, a drawn-out monologue about how his current agency was failing him. I already knew what the issue was. The agency handling his ads treated him like an afterthought. Their campaign was sleek but insincere. It didn't fit his brand. I was prepared for the meeting. What I wasn't prepared for was what happened next. My presentation was set for late afternoon, an hour-long pitch using Ryan's slides, followed by a Q&A session that could stretch late into the evening. Then, as if the universe had a personal vendetta, Murphy's Law kicked in. A substation failure knocked out power across the area. No lights, no air conditioning, no working office equipment. The entire schedule unraveled in minutes. The factory tour? Cancelled. The catered lunch? Replaced with a rushed pizza delivery. My carefully prepared slide deck? Now completely useless. Franklin, always quick on his feet, took control. Instead of rescheduling, he moved the meeting outdoors to a picnic area. Without a projector, I had to rely on the handful of color printouts I'd brought. I passed them around, telling the team they'd have to share. At that moment, I had two choices: stall or adapt. I adapted. Rather than sticking to a scripted pitch, I turned it into a real conversation. I asked Franklin and his team what they actually wanted their ads to say. What was the heart of their brand? What did they want people to feel when they saw their name? Their answers came fast. They wanted authenticity, tradition. They wanted to emphasize their roots, the craftsmanship, the small-town values that defined their company. It was nostalgia-driven, sure, but more importantly, it was real. That's when I got blunt. I told them exactly why their current campaign wasn't working. Their ad agency didn't believe in their brand. The marketing wasn't built for customers. It was built to impress other ad executives. Slick, soulless, and completely detached from Hargrove's identity. It was so polished, it might as well have been mocking them. Franklin's reaction was immediate. He shot up from his seat, slamming a hand on the table. That's it. They're making fun of us more than they're selling for us. And they think we don't notice. He turned to me, his expression sharp, testing. All right, Ethan. How would you do it? So I told him. I threw out the old plan and pitched something new, something honest. A campaign focused on real Hargrove employees, captured in their actual workspaces, showcasing their skill and dedication. No actors, no marketing gimmicks, just people who took pride in their work. Each ad would end with a worker turning to the camera and saying, "Every night, I go home knowing I've done my best for the people who buy what I make." Not many can say that and mean it, but I can. And Mr. Hargrove stands behind me. Then Franklin himself would step in beside them. You have our word on it. Cheesy. Maybe. But it wasn't fake. And they loved it. By the time I walked away, the deal was done. Franklin told me to FedEx the contract, options included, to his hotel in Germany. He wanted me back in 3 weeks, ready to roll. He'd personally walk me through his factory, introducing me to the workers who would star in the campaign. It wasn't even 12:30. And just like that, we had landed our first major account. For the agency that botched it, Hargrove was just another name on a long client list. But for us, it changed everything. It meant stability. It meant hiring more staff. It meant finally lightening the crushing workload. I felt invincible. Heading to the lake, I decided not to call ahead. I wanted to surprise them, to show up triumphant, with a story worth celebrating. Stopping for gas, I thought about changing into my swimsuit right there, but the restroom was disgusting. Instead, I pulled around back and swapped clothes in the car. By the time I hit the road again, my work clothes were tossed in the back seat, and I was cruising down the highway in nothing but my swimsuit, ready to soak up the sun. When I pulled into the cabin driveway, I spotted Samantha sprawled out in the hammock by the dock, her skin glistening under the late afternoon sun. She wore a tiny bikini, and I had to admit, she looked incredible. Samantha was always beautiful, but at that moment, stretched out lazily, bathed in golden sunlight, she was breathtaking. The cabin was silent. The boat was anchored offshore, gently rocking in the water. Ryan and Olivia had to be out there, probably fishing, maybe sunbathing. I let Samantha sleep and headed straight for the lake. Diving in, the shock of cold water hit me fast. snapping me back to reality. My head cleared. My body kicked into motion. I swam toward the boat, eager to surprise them. As I climbed onto the transom, I heard something. Muffled voices. From below deck. That was odd. It was a perfect day to be outside. Then I heard something else. A soft moan. My stomach twisted. Instinct took over. I moved quietly, stepping toward the hatch. 2 steps down, and I saw them. Ryan was stretched out on the starboard bunk. Olivia was on top of him, moving slowly, intimately. Their rhythm wasn't hurried. It was familiar. It was practiced. My breath caught. Olivia's eyes were closed, lost in the moment, her body curving into his like a dancer following a well-rehearsed routine. I knew that look. I had seen that look too many times before. Then, just as she reached the peak of it, she tilted her head back. The soft cry left her lips, unmistakable, just like all the nights before. Except this time, it wasn't for me. She rocked forward, coming down from it, and that was when she opened her eyes. And saw me. She screamed my name. Ryan let out a lazy chuckle. "Babe, it's just me." Olivia's panic hit instantly. She slapped his chest, her breath jagged. "No, Ryan. It's Ethan. He's right there. He saw us." For a second, I couldn't move. My body locked up, frozen somewhere between rage and disbelief. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a drunken lapse in judgment. This was routine. This was normal for them, and I had just been the fool who never saw it. A part of me wanted to grab the salvage axe from the emergency locker and swing until there was nothing left but wreckage. Another part knew I needed to think, needed a plan. I backed away, barely registering Olivia's frantic voice. My eyes flicked to the shore. Samantha still asleep in the hammock, unaware. The 2 cars parked side by side. That gave me an idea, at least a short-term one. I turned toward the water, ready to dive. Then Ryan's voice rang out, uncertain now. "Olivia, are you sure?" She shrieked. "Are you an idiot?" "Of course, I'm sure." It was Ethan. I pushed off the transom and plunged into the lake. The cold water hit like a slap, numbing everything but instinct. I swam hard, each stroke buying me a few more seconds of clarity. But peace wasn't going to last. I was the fastest swimmer of the group. I'd be at the dock in no time. And once I got there, the gang of 4 would be finished. Behind me, the boat's engine sputtered. Ryan was panicking, trying to start it too fast, flooding it. Served him right. Ryan had a new name in my mind. A-hole. I briefly considered something harsher, like 304, the exact moment I caught them. But a-hole worked well enough. I reached the dock, pulled myself out of the water, and walked past Samantha, still dozing. Her phone rang inside her tote. A groggy, confused voice answered. Seconds later, she was scrambling to her feet, trying to find her sandals, calling after me. I didn't stop. At the cars, I flipped open the small blade on my key ring. Ryan's spotless Range Rover sat there, untouched. That wouldn't do. The knife sliced through one of the rear tires. Then the spare mounted on the back. Air hissed out in sharp bursts, then silence. Behind me, the boat's engine finally roared to life. They were heading back fast, but I didn't turn around. My Subaru started up smoothly. As I threw it into reverse, I saw them running up from the lake, swimsuits now in place, looking perfectly respectable. Wouldn't want to offend any tourists. I spun the wheel and executed a perfect bootlegger's turn, gravel spraying as I tore away from the cabin. The move was flawless, something I'd always wanted to pull off. But instead of satisfaction, my stomach twisted. Once I hit the main road, I sped for a while before easing up. No one would be chasing me anytime soon, not with 2 of their 5 tires flat. 5 minutes later, my phone started ringing. I had it set to play voicemails aloud, like an old-school answering machine. Olivia's voice came through, frantic. "Ethan, please, just come back. I can explain." She called again, then again. Each message was the same recycled lie. As I drove, I thought about something small but satisfying. Ryan had been so rattled he forgot to tie the boat up. I had watched it drift, slowly but surely, further into the lake. A small, stupid victory, but I'd take it. Smirking, I called his number and left my own message. I told them about Hargrove, how, despite the odds, we had landed the account. Then I made it clear. I wanted nothing to do with it. Or them. The partnership was over, effective the moment I stepped onto that boat. Ryan had never been a real friend. Olivia had never truly loved me. And Samantha, whether she had known all along or had just turned a blind eye, was just another person I couldn't trust. I ended the message with a final thought. Good luck finding emergency roadside assistance on a Friday night. Then I let go. The shock finally hit. Olivia and Ryan. Together. Comfortable. Familiar. How long had it been going on? Months? Years? It had always been possible. The four of us spent so much time together, switching up plans, covering for each other. I had taken Samantha to events when Olivia and Ryan had work to do. Now I knew what that really meant. And Samantha scrambling after me, saying she needed to talk. What would she have said? The truth? Another excuse? It didn't matter. Ryan and Olivia had been at it for who knows how long. If Samantha had casually broken the news to me over a drink, I wouldn't have been surprised. Maybe she'd have offered me a whiskey first to soften the blow. The thought lingered. What was in it for her? My phone kept ringing, their desperation buzzing in my pocket like an angry hornet. For a moment, I considered tracking how many calls per mile I was averaging. Some petty, pointless metric to focus on. But I wasn't in the mood for records. I powered the phone off. Silence. Now what? My wife had been sleeping with my best friend. My best friend, who also happened to be my business partner. Perfect. That would make the office holiday parties real fun. My brain defaulted to jokes. Stupid, bitter ones. But it was either laugh or spiral. If I didn't joke, I'd be aiming my car at a stone wall. Going home wasn't an option. That's where they'd go first, probably already crafting their version of events, piecing together their lies. Instead, I headed to the office. Soon to be Carter and Calloway. Ryan could have it all to himself. Maybe he'd leave my name on the door out of guilt, like Marley's ghost in A Christmas Carol. Another joke. Another distraction. Then, finally, the dam broke. I had to pull over. My chest clenched, my breath ragged. Reality hit like a sledgehammer. The sobs came hard. Sudden. I hadn't cried like that in years. Maybe ever. After a few minutes, I wiped my face, forced myself to breathe, and kept driving. Once I reached the office, I did what I did best. I made a plan. Emotions could wait. First, I opened new bank accounts and transferred half of everything. Our joint CDs? Cashed out. Penalties be damned. Olivia wasn't here to object. Not my problem anymore. Next, I placed orders to liquidate our investment portfolio. The system flagged my request. A broker called back, invoking some cooling-off period and insisting they needed to speak with Olivia before the transaction could proceed. I told the broker to knock himself out, but I had every legal right to move forward, with or without Olivia's approval. By the end of the business day, it would be done. Then I called Walter, our family lawyer. It was late, but he picked up. I need a divorce attorney, I said, and someone to handle dissolving the business. Walter hesitated. Are you sure? Maybe counseling. That ship had sailed at exactly 3:04 p.m. today. He sighed. Call me Monday. We'll set everything up. Another checkmark. Next, I searched for a new place to live. Found an apartment in the suburbs, close to the main highways. The leasing office was still open. A 6-month lease with an option to renew. If I came by early in the morning, they'd hold it until noon. Paperwork could be signed Monday. Another checkmark. Progress. My life was in free fall, but at least I was moving forward. It wasn't much of a trade-off for losing my wife and best friend in one brutal afternoon, but it was something. With my list almost complete, I added one final task. Digging through my contacts, I found a business card. Graham Thornton, head of one of the top ad agencies in town. His personal cell was scrawled on the back. Graham was a ruthless player in the industry, but he had mellowed over the years, or at least had people to do the dirty work for him now. I called. He sounded surprised, but not annoyed. After some small talk, he cut straight to the point. This isn't a social call. What's going on? I told him everything. Catching Olivia and Ryan. Walking away from my marriage and my company in one afternoon. I needed out fast. I couldn't ask him for a new wife, but I did need a job. Graham was silent for a beat. His firm was solid but stretched thin in some areas. He didn't have an obvious opening for someone at my level, but he never turned down talent or a man in need. He promised to check with his team and get back to me by Wednesday. You know, he admitted, I never thought you'd actually consider working for me. I figured Carter and Calloway was on the rise. Not anymore, I assured him. Then he asked about leads. I mentioned we had just landed Hargrove and Sons, but whether Ryan could handle it alone was another story. Graham perked up. He knew the name. I reminded him. He used to have the Hargrove account before he lost it to the agency that botched the job. Now Hargrove was ready to walk again. Graham saw the opportunity. But I made one thing clear. I wasn't about to steal it for him. As much as I hated Ryan, the account belonged to the firm. I wouldn't stoop to his level. That said, if Ryan failed, Graham might get a second shot. Graham laughed. You're still trying to play fair after what he did? Principles still matter, I said. I have to look myself in the mirror. Then you don't belong in advertising, he joked. Before we wrapped up, he mentioned his daughter, Natalie. I had met her once at a New Year's party. Smart, sharp, ambitious. He was bringing her into the firm. I teased him about nepotism, and he fired back that she was as ruthless as he was, only with an MBA to back it up. She'd be handling the Hargrove situation, which meant I'd be seeing her soon. Word of advice, he added. She hates nepotism jokes. Noted. By the time we hung up, I had a possible job on the horizon. Another checkmark. If you didn't know my life had just imploded, you might think I was actually making progress. Now, the part one dreaded. I had to go home and pack. And I knew they'd be waiting. The same people I had explicitly told I never wanted to see again. Before heading there, I booked a hotel near my new apartment. 2 nights. Enough time to clear my head and figure out my next move. Another checkmark. Nowhere to go but forward. Before leaving the office, I grabbed a mini recorder, loaded it with fresh batteries, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. If I had to endure hours of excuses and half-truths, I wanted a record of it. Then I emptied my desk, tossing junk into the trash, packing what little mattered into a Xerox paper box. Check. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark and empty. They hadn't made it back yet. Apparently, emergency roadside assistance wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I had just climbed into the attic to grab my suitcases when I heard the door open. They had found me. I hit record, placed my jacket at the end of the bed with the mic turned up, and kept packing. Samantha walked in first. Ryan and Olivia followed, hesitant. They watched in silence as I dumped anything unnecessary from my suitcases onto the floor. If I hadn't used it in a year, it wasn't coming. If it was hers, I didn't care. Olivia spoke first, her voice carefully measured, trying to sound calm, trying to act like she was in control. She apologized, asked me to listen, begged me not to lose it. I agreed, but on my terms. No touching, no hugging, no fake intimacy. Ryan stayed out of arm's reach, probably a wise decision unless he wanted to get knocked flat. And I wouldn't tolerate lies. I wanted the full truth. No more deception. They had been lying by omission long enough. Samantha perched on the arm of a chair, avoiding my gaze. They had hours to get their story straight, yet they just stood there, shifting uncomfortably. Ryan finally spoke, for once in his life sounding unsure. He tried steering the conversation toward business, as if that mattered. He couldn't believe I'd walk away from the partnership, not with the Hargrove deal about to put us on the map. We had a shot at real success. Why throw it away? I stopped mid-pack, turned to him, and made it crystal clear. There was no we, no us, no partnership. I wasn't about to work side by side with the man who had been screwing my wife. If he didn't understand that, he was too stupid to dress himself in the morning. Ryan sputtered something about money, about hate, about how business partners didn't have to like each other. I cut him off. We weren't just done as partners. Carter and Calloway was dead. Olivia took her turn, switching tactics. Her voice was soft, pleading. She called it a mistake, begged me not to throw away 8 years of marriage over one bad decision. I slammed my suitcase shut. None of them understood. They weren't upset because they had betrayed me. They were upset because they had been caught. This wasn't about salvaging a business or a marriage. It was about damage control. One mistake? Maybe, I could have forgiven that. But what I saw on that boat wasn't a mistake. It was routine. It was comfortable. It was familiar. That wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. That was something they had done over and over again. And that was my new reality. Every time I looked at Ryan, I'd see it. Every time I heard Olivia's voice, I'd hear it. That moment, their moment, was now my permanent screensaver. There was no fixing that. Then I turned to Samantha, the one person who had yet to speak. I asked what I really wanted to know. How long had she known? How long had she accepted it? Had she been part of it from the start? Might as well get the full truth while I packed. Olivia took a deep breath, like she was preparing to spin the confession into something that might actually sound reasonable. She reminded me of a conversation we'd had years ago, early in our friendship with Ryan and Samantha, when she had asked if I found Samantha attractive. At the time, I had assumed it was some kind of test. But no, she had been serious. Curious if I had ever fantasized about her. I admitted I had. Figured it was harmless talk. Apparently, for Olivia, it was more than just talk. She admitted she had started having similar thoughts about Ryan. He was different from me, taller, bigger, physically imposing in ways I wasn't. Samantha had commented on his size once, and the idea had stuck in Olivia's head. Eventually, she and Samantha had an open conversation about their feelings, leading to the realization that Samantha was just as drawn to me. That's when they started testing the waters, feeling out how Ryan and I might react to the idea of getting closer to each other's spouses. Olivia had framed her question about Samantha strategically, gauging my reaction. Meanwhile, Samantha had been doing the same with Ryan. He had been interested but cautious, not wanting to risk his marriage, our friendship, or the business. I, on the other hand, had shut it down immediately. Samantha chimed in, saying they had agreed. Either all four of us were involved, or nothing would happen. Otherwise, it would just be cheating. Olivia admitted she had tried to ease me into the idea, but I had always dismissed it. Fantasies were one thing. Acting on them was another. We had taken vows. They weren't up for renegotiation. I had made my stance clear. I wouldn't betray those vows, and I wouldn't tolerate her doing it either. She claimed she had accepted my decision at the time. I zipped up my suitcase and reached for another, asking the obvious question. If they had agreed not to act without my approval, what changed? Ryan and Olivia hesitated. Samantha stepped in. She said it started after the miscarriage. I froze. That hadn't even crossed my mind. But apparently, it played a bigger role in all of this than I realized. It had been a tough time in our marriage. A late September afternoon. We were outside, taking advantage of the warm weather, doing yard work. Olivia mentioned cramping, but brushed it off. Then it got worse. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. I rushed her inside. When I called the doctor, Dr. Lawson immediately asked if she had taken a pregnancy test. Olivia scoffed. She was on birth control. She couldn't be pregnant. But nothing is 100%. Dr. Lawson told me to take her to the ER immediately. As we were getting ready to leave, Olivia gasped, pain flashing across her face. Then I saw it. Blood. By the time we got to the hospital, it had worsened. Tests. Painkillers. Hours of uncertainty. Then, finally, an answer. It was a chemical pregnancy. A miscarriage so early that the fetus never developed a detectable heartbeat. At the time, it had seemed like just another rough chapter in life. But now, standing in this room, suitcase half-packed, I was realizing it had changed everything. Olivia claimed she never even suspected she was pregnant. But she was. That fragile, barely formed life slipped away before we ever knew it existed. The hospital discharged her that night. I did everything I could to support her. But she withdrew. Barely spoke. Barely moved. Nights were the worst. She recoiled from my touch. A silent wall between us. Something had changed. For weeks, she refused to go anywhere. Do anything. Ryan and Samantha visited often. At the time, I thought their company helped. Now I knew better. What I didn't realize at the time was that something else had been happening. Something that had nothing to do with healing. Whenever I wasn't around, the flirtation between Olivia and Ryan had escalated into something more. And when they left, she would sink right back into that same hollow silence. Dr. Lawson had told me Olivia was dealing with post-traumatic depression. Be patient, he'd said. She's not ready for intimacy. Pressuring her will only make it worse. I respected that. I gave her space. Then Halloween came. For the first time in weeks, she seemed like herself again. She threw herself into decorating, took pictures of neighborhood kids in costumes, even laughed. That night, as we locked up the house, I thought maybe we were turning a corner. But when I hinted at being close again, she shut down completely. It's too soon, she said. So I let it go. A week later, election day rolled around. Samantha picked up the story from there. After voting, we all went out to dinner, then back to Ryan and Samantha's place to watch the results. It was Olivia's first real night out since the miscarriage. I remembered that night, how Samantha got violently sick from bad seafood, how I, as the designated driver, took her to the hospital. It was raining. Ryan was too drunk to drive. Olivia was exhausted, so they stayed behind. Samantha admitted she had hesitated, but they had all agreed. Nothing would happen unless I was on board. Before she left, she had reminded Ryan to behave. He brushed it off with a casual, "Of course, babe." The next morning, she came back, and Ryan told her the truth. He and Olivia had crossed the line. What was supposed to wait for my approval had already happened. Ryan sighed, finally stepping in to admit it. They had been drinking, getting closer. One of them made the first move. They had fantasized about it for months, talked about how it would play out. And when the moment came, they let it happen. He admitted they had broken the agreement. Olivia looked guilty but didn't deny it. She called it weakness. Hers. His. They had wanted it. Too badly. Once it happened, there was no undoing it. Samantha accepted it as inevitable. And after that, they rewrote the rules. Ryan and Olivia would continue sleeping together, still clinging to the idea that I would eventually come around. They had even considered getting me drunk, setting me up with Samantha, just to push things along. But she refused. Until I agreed, they would keep their secret. Make sure I never suspected a thing. Samantha claimed she had tried to protect me from it. Olivia, on the other hand, had the audacity to say she had never denied me affection, that she had kept our marriage intact despite everything. That was the last lie I could tolerate. I slammed my suitcase shut, cutting them off mid-sentence. I told you no lies. And that was a blatant one. I turned to Ryan, my voice cold. Did you keep sleeping with her after that first night? He nodded. How often? 2 or 3 times a week. I turned back to Olivia. She admitted that we had last been together the night before the miscarriage. A month later, on Halloween, she had still refused me, said it was too soon. 7 days after that, she was in bed with Ryan. She had been too grief-stricken for me, but a week later, she was eager for him. I asked when we had finally been together again. She hesitated. She couldn't remember, but I could. Christmas Eve. For 7 weeks, she had turned me away, shut me out, while secretly sleeping with Ryan multiple times a week. And yet she had the audacity to claim she had never denied me. That wasn't just betrayal. That was contempt. I grabbed my suitcases, trying to balance the duffel and DOP kit, but it was too much for one trip. As I turned back to make a second run, I saw them exchange glances, still struggling to process what I had just said. Samantha was the first to break. She turned on Olivia. You told me things between you two were fine. You swore to me, but you were pushing him away the whole time, weren't you? Ryan looked just as confused. I thought you were still with him, he muttered. He had assumed Olivia was only distant at first, but she had moved on completely, left me in the dark. Olivia floundered, her voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't even realize. I shot her a look. You didn't realize? Her lip trembled. With Ryan, I felt free, comforted, happy. But with you, she swallowed hard. With you, I was reminded of what we lost. The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. I stared at her, unmoved. She had shut me out, but found solace with him. That was the reality. Even when we finally reconnected at Christmas, things had never been the same. She had been distant, less engaged, holding something back. Now I knew why. She had given everything to Ryan while keeping me at arm's length. I picked up my bags and started for the door. Samantha grabbed my duffel and followed me into the garage. She finally spoke. We never meant for it to be this way, she said. You weren't supposed to be left out. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. I let out a short laugh. Well, congratulations. You failed. She hesitated. Why aren't you as furious with me as you are with them? I exhaled sharply. She hadn't lied to my face while sneaking around behind my back. But she had let it happen. She had stood by and allowed every broken agreement, every deception, every betrayal. She acknowledged that, nodding slowly. I should have known better. I shook my head. I'll deal with hating you tomorrow. She swallowed. I'll talk to them. Get them to stop. I almost laughed. And what exactly do you think that'll accomplish? She insisted they were shaken. Especially Olivia. As if that mattered now. She truly hadn't realized she was pushing me away, and Samantha was furious with her for it. Maybe, Samantha suggested, we could take a break, cool off, talk things through, even see a counselor. I shut that down immediately. There was nothing to fix. Even if they stopped right now, the damage was permanent. The images in my head wouldn't fade. The trust was gone. They had broken their own rules whenever it suited them. Their promises meant nothing. This was goodbye. I told her I wouldn't be returning any calls. The only communication I'd have with Olivia would be through my lawyer. The marriage, the agency, everything we built, over. For a second, I thought she might hug me. I tensed, stepping back. Rule number 1, no touching. She understood. She turned away, heading back inside. I watched her go, barely registering the thought that she still had that same knockout figure. But it didn't matter anymore. The next day, I checked into a hotel. By Saturday, I had the keys to my new apartment. Monday morning, I signed a 6-month lease and called Walter's office for a divorce lawyer recommendation. I got lucky. Someone canceled their appointment. I took the slot. At a Salvation Army store, I picked up some cheap furniture and kitchen basics. 2 guys were browsing, complaining about not having enough cash. They had a pickup truck, though. I hired them on the spot. 2 trips later, I was settled in, and they were $100 richer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The apartment had a phone line and was wired for cable. Internet would be up by Wednesday. I ignored every voicemail from the gang of 3. Same scripted apologies. Same worthless promises. If they were so sorry, maybe they should have been using their time more productively, like screwing each other into oblivion. Tuesday, I met with my divorce attorney, Ms. Holloway. She said an expedited divorce was possible if both parties agreed. I called Olivia on the spot. Will you go along with it? She broke down instantly, crying, begging, swearing she loved me and would do anything to fix things. I hung up. Clearly, that was a no. Miss Holloway smirked. Not the most constructive approach, Mr. Carter. Then she asked for details. I told her everything. When I finished, she sat back, impressed. Well, I take back my earlier comment. That's one hell of a case. Adultery was the strongest legal ground, but proving it would take time and money. Now that Olivia knew I was serious, she and Ryan might tone things down, or at least cover their tracks. Maybe, I said. But how about this? I pulled out my mini recorder. It had everything from Friday night. Clear voices. Undeniable admissions. She listened carefully, nodding. The legality was questionable since they hadn't known they were being recorded. But it was my house, my bedroom. The court might rule in my favor. It was worth a shot. Then she asked what Samantha did for a living. Government contractor. Does she require security clearance? Probably. That opened another angle, an alienation of affection lawsuit. It would put Samantha and Ryan under legal pressure, potentially jeopardizing her job. It was a dirty move. But if I just wanted to push Olivia into agreeing to a no-fault divorce, it could work. I shook my head. I don't care about revenge. I just want to be free. Tuesday night, Graham called. Be here at 9. Ready for battle. He wasn't kidding. Wednesday morning, I met the senior staff, department heads, and account execs, including his daughter Natalie. I vaguely remembered her from a New Year's party years ago. Back then, I had trained myself not to pay too much attention. Pretty ironic, in hindsight. The moment I walked in, I felt the tension. They saw me as a threat, though they weren't sure why. Graham hadn't given me authority over anyone, but he had given me unlimited access. Meetings, brainstorming sessions, everything. I sat in on discussions, asked questions, some good, some dumb. When someone made a sarcastic remark about the dumb ones, I pointed out that their unwillingness to bring me up to speed was why I had to ask in the first place. The less I know, the more time I waste with stupid questions. That earned me grudging cooperation. At first, my suggestions were dismissed outright. Then, occasionally, someone would ask me to elaborate. Once they realized I was actually trying to help, a few invited me into real working sessions, where the actual decisions were made, not just the polished presentations. Over time, word got around that I wasn't completely the enemy. Some managers even started seeking me out for input. Natalie was different. She engaged with me, privately. She'd discuss her projects one-on-one, but never involved her team. It was progress, but slow. 3 months in, I was still an outsider. One morning, I walked into Graham's office. I'm not getting anywhere fast enough. He nodded and shut the door. You're trying to change an entire company culture, Ethan. That never happens overnight. Graham had a long-term plan. He wanted me as his deputy, grooming me to take over when he retired. But it couldn't happen overnight. A sudden promotion would alienate too many key creatives. people who already resented my presence. If I wanted their respect, I had to earn it. I frowned. What about Natalie? She was his daughter, the obvious successor. Graham didn't waver. It's my agency, Ethan, and Natalie's not ready yet. That was the final word on the matter. If I wanted a real shot, I had to prove I was the best in the room. Confidence wasn't enough. This was a steep climb. Graham had promised to push me hard, and he meant it. Sitting in meetings critiquing others wasn't enough. I needed something tangible. So he assigned me 5 hopeless accounts, one from each senior exec. These were the clients no one wanted. The worst performing contracts. The ones already considered lost causes. Natalie's was the biggest disaster of them all. So I started there. Over time, I managed to revive 3 accounts, including Natalie's. When I walked into her office with the signed renewal contract, she finally acknowledged the turnaround. I didn't think that client was salvageable, she admitted. I might have misjudged you. Grudging respect, but it was a start. She studied me for a moment, then asked what my real goal was at Thornton. I deflected. Doesn't matter. Graham's the one making the decisions. She pressed. Carter and Calloway was on the rise. Why leave? Why start over? I told her she already knew. Rumors travel fast in this business. She wanted the truth. So I gave her the short version. Ryan had been sleeping with my wife for 2 years. Sometimes in my home, in my bed. His wife, Samantha, knew, because they had been planning to turn our friendships into a full-fledged wife-swapping arrangement. I'd been the last to figure it out. While they plotted, I had been naive enough to believe in monogamy. Now, I was divorcing Olivia, dissolving the partnership. No wife, no business. Graham gave me a shot when I had nothing left. Natalie took that in, nodding slowly. I heard whispers. The reality's worse. Then she surprised me. Must have been brutal, professionally. Walking away from something you built. She shifted gears. Despite the team's initial resistance, they'd come to respect my critiques. I was direct, but I didn't attack ideas without backing up my reasoning. Now, they wanted me involved, to discuss strategy, offer insight, push them forward. But before extending the invitation, she hesitated. Given what you've been through, can you handle working closely with an all-female team? She wouldn't blame me if I had some lingering resentment toward women in general. I let out a wry laugh. Cynical? Sure, but I'm not that far gone. At some point, if I ever wanted to move on, I'd have to trust someone again. I agreed to meet her team. Natalie smirked. You can call them girls or women, just not deceitful liars. I'll do my best. Meeting Natalie's team was like stepping into a lion's den without a whip or chair. Instead of dictating the agenda, I told them to say whatever they wanted. No filter. No holds barred. They did not hold back. One of them, a tall redhead named Isabella, outright accused me of wanting to run to Graham and get them fired if they spoke honestly. I reassured them that wasn't my style. Even if I tried, Natalie had Graham's backing and wouldn't let it happen. I pointed out they were her hand-picked team. Their opinions mattered more than anything else. What followed was brutal. Natalie had clearly set the tone before I arrived, painting me as an egotistical outsider. They tore into me with critiques that made her earlier skepticism look mild. Isabella, the fiercest of the group, led the charge. She wasn't conventionally attractive, but her sharp wit and intense demeanor commanded attention. She was tall, athletic, striking in a way that made people take notice, though mostly for her cutting remarks. I listened, defended myself when I could, admitted mistakes when they were valid. Slowly, the hostility softened, though they remained critical. The biggest complaint? I was too hard on Natalie in meetings. I explained my perspective. Natalie had talent, but being Graham's daughter shielded her from genuine criticism. If she wanted to succeed, she needed to take unfiltered feedback. Sugarcoating wouldn't help her. It would hold her back. This did not go over well. Isabella accused me of being patronizing, but Natalie surprised everyone. He's right, she admitted. His critiques made me think more critically about my ideas. She acknowledged that her overconfidence had led to past mistakes, including the bookseller's campaign debacle. She credited me with turning it around. Then she asked her team to hold her to the same standard going forward. The tension eased. The meeting turned productive. From that point on, Natalie and her team gradually warmed to me. Meanwhile, my divorce from Olivia was finalized after 6 months. During that time, I built a stronger working relationship with Natalie's team. They were some of the most talented creatives in the agency. I told Graham as much, but he kept them isolated, letting Natalie lead them without interference. When I suggested he was wasting their potential, he brushed me off. My business. My decision. I started noticing a chill in our interactions. Maybe Graham felt I was questioning his authority too much. But wasn't that why he hired me? To evaluate everything critically? To give unfiltered feedback? After all, he had positioned me as his potential successor. Meanwhile, the process of dissolving Carter and Calloway dragged on. Our partnership hadn't been structured with easy exits, and I refused to deal with Ryan directly, which only dragged things out. Then, fate intervened. Right around the time my divorce was finalized, Ryan made a fatal mistake on the Hargrove account. Franklin fired him, taking with him the firm's only major client. With no revenue, Ryan was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, effectively dissolving the business. I paid my share of outstanding taxes and walked away free. Ryan, now jobless, was reportedly shopping his resume all over town. Meanwhile, at Thornton, my dynamic with Natalie's team continued to evolve. One day, during a heated debate in Natalie's conference room, Isabella was tearing apart my argument. It was a design issue, one of my weaknesses, and she wasn't letting me off easy. The rest of the team stayed quiet, but their amused expressions said it all. Watching ISA dismantle my points had become a favorite pastime. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in the right place, even if it meant occasionally getting my clock cleaned. Days later, Graham pulled me aside. No preamble. I'm thinking of hiring Ryan Calloway. Just like that. He claimed Ryan's graphic skills would fill a gap at the agency. Graham was watching me closely, waiting for a reaction. I gave him one. That feels like a gut punch. Graham dismissed my feelings, insisting I separate personal issues from professional needs. His patronizing tone made it clear. He had already made up his mind. That's when it hit me. Graham might be growing disenchanted with me. When I joined, he appreciated my boldness, my drive to shake things up. But as I became more influential, he likely saw me as a threat to his authority. Hiring Ryan wasn't just about filling a gap. It was a calculated move to push me out. He offered a compromise. Ryan would be isolated, so we wouldn't have to interact. I laughed at that. You really think that's realistic? I'm in leadership, Graham. Avoiding him would be impossible. He didn't argue. And that's when I made my decision. If you want Ryan, fine. It's your agency. I slid my resignation across the desk. But I won't work for a man who hires my backstabbing ex-business partner. I'll clear out by the end of the day. Graham warned me to be careful with ultimatums. I met his gaze. This isn't a threat. It's final. As I packed up my desk, Natalie and her team stormed in, demanding an explanation. I told her the truth. Graham had positioned me as his de facto CO, his intended successor. But as I stepped into the role, he resented me for it. Hiring Ryan was his way of forcing me out without having to fire me himself. I acknowledged Ryan's talent, but argued that keeping him around would stifle promising creatives like Isabella and Colin Reeves. Natalie looked stunned, torn between loyalty to her father and frustration with the situation. I wished her and the team luck, genuinely hoping they could navigate whatever came next. As for me, my time at Thornton was over. Before I left, Natalie asked where I'd be that night. At home, I said. Takeout, maybe laundry. Exciting stuff. She hesitated. You planning to job hunt? I shook my head. Not exactly. I'm starting over. I explained my plan, launching my own firm. I had saved money, secured a line of credit. Even if my initial production setup was just a local print shop, I was ready. My first priority? Reclaiming the Hargrove contract. Natalie smirked. Don't be surprised if my team and I drop by later with takeout. Then she warned me, when hiring staff, flexibility would be key. That night, Natalie called. She and her team weren't coming after all. Graham had moved fast, offering her my former role, full authority, guaranteed transition to take over Thornton in 2 years. It was a deal she couldn't refuse, and I couldn't blame her. She sounded genuinely sorry, but in the end, family and opportunity outweighed everything else. I wished her well. I hadn't expected anyone to follow me, but later that night, there was a knock on my door. 3 of Natalie's team members stood there, Chinese takeout in hand. Lauren and Megan, both skilled generalists, along with Isabella. ISA smirked. "Don't screw this up for us, Carter." The only one who stayed with Natalie was Sophie. I respected their leap of faith, leaving security at Thornton for an uncertain venture. I've worked hard to make sure they never regretted it. When Henry asked about the rest of the gang of 4, I didn't hold back. After I left, Ryan did join Thornton, but things fell apart for the rest of them. Samantha, Ryan's wife, initially tolerated his affair with Olivia because it was part of their original arrangement. But after everything collapsed, resentment started to fester. Ryan's attention shifted almost exclusively to Olivia, and Samantha, feeling betrayed, finally confronted them. Ryan, as expected, made empty promises about balancing things out. But behind Samantha's back, he and Olivia continued sneaking around, cheating on the one person who had enabled their affair. When Samantha caught them, she didn't hesitate. She filed for divorce and never looked back. Later, she described Ryan as nothing more than a selfish opportunist who cared for no one but himself. That left Ryan and Olivia together, both single now, at least officially. Henry, grinning, asked if I had ended up with Samantha, given my past attraction to her. I shook my head. She reached out, but it never went beyond a conversation. She regretted everything, but trust was irreparably broken. Even if I still felt a lingering attraction, it wasn't enough to overcome her role in the betrayal. We parted as old acquaintances, no lingering resentment, but nothing more. From there, Carter and Carter took off. Henry chuckled, shaking his head. "You really turned chaos into opportunity, huh?" I smirked. "Something like that. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I ever made." After saying our goodbyes, Samantha transferred out of the area. A while later, I got an invitation to her wedding. I wished her well, hoping her next chapter turned out better than the last. As for Ryan and Olivia, they finally had the freedom to indulge their relationship openly, no sneaking around, no complications. That lasted 2 months. Then Olivia called Samantha in a rage. Ryan had started pushing the idea of swinging again, and Olivia, finally fed up, ended the relationship on the spot. Not long after, she reached out to me. By then, I had cooled off enough to speak with her. She apologized for the deception, the betrayal, the distance she had created between us. She admitted she hadn't fully realized how much she had hurt me until I spelled it out while packing that night. I appreciated her honesty, but I couldn't offer much in return. Whatever had been between us was long gone. Ryan's story, however, spiraled further downhill. After I left Thornton, Graham brought him on as planned. Ryan impressed early on with his graphics work, but he lacked versatility. He couldn't handle marketing, strategy, or anything beyond visuals. Feedback trickled back to me through mutual contacts like Natalie and Sophie. It was clear Graham regretted his decision. 6 months in, Ryan made a catastrophic mistake. He invited Sophie, Natalie's protege, to his apartment under the pretense of working on a project. Once there, he tried to get physical. When Sophie resisted, he became aggressive. Fearing for her safety, she stopped fighting. But Ryan hurt her anyway. The next day, Sophie reported everything to Natalie. Natalie made sure Ryan faced legal consequences. He was arrested, convicted, and fired. Natalie also backed Sophie in a civil suit, one that financially ruined Ryan. His name landed on the National Offender Registry. His career in advertising? Over. Ryan vanished soon after. Last I heard, he was working as a freelance illustrator for a hunting gear company somewhere out west. His fall from grace was spectacular. Looking back, I think Ryan's downfall stemmed from delusions of grandeur. Having affairs with both Olivia and Samantha likely fed his ego, made him think he was untouchable. He believed himself irresistible, and that dangerous mindset led to his own destruction. Months later, I ran into him at a local media awards dinner. Despite my attempts to stay on the opposite side of the room, Ryan spotted me and approached. Ignoring my clear signals to back off, he extended his hand for a handshake. I refused. He persisted. That was it. I slapped his hand aside and delivered a swift 1-2 punch, one to the gut, one to the jaw. Ryan crumpled to the floor, gasping. I walked out. My team collected the award we had come to celebrate. As I finished recounting this to Henry, he checked his watch, clearly noting the time. Before he could wrap up the conversation, she walked in. A striking redhead. She made her way toward me, pulled me to my feet, and kissed me in a way that left no doubt about who she was. I turned to Henry, grinning. Meet my business partner, sparring partner, and wife, Isa Carter. Formerly Rhodes. Isa shook Henry's hand firmly, flashing him her signature smirk. Pleasure meeting an old friend of Ethan's. Henry smiled, glancing between us. Now that's what I call a happy ending. Isa arched a brow at me. Happy? Is that what he's been telling you? Because I remember having to seduce him on my drafting table just to get my spot at the firm. I laughed, shaking my head. Don't believe a word she says. Henry, amused, turned back to Isa. So how'd you manage to break through all that cynicism after what he's been through? Isa's eyes locked onto mine as she grinned. Simple. He's mine, and I don't share. Henry let out a chuckle. Eventually, he stood to leave, congratulating us on finding happiness. He promised to keep in touch and wished us well before heading off, smiling as he left. Watching our playful banter, he muttered to himself how rare it was to see such genuine joy between two people. After Henry left, Isa and I continued our back and forth, debating where to grab food. In the end, the night was about us. Our connection, our humor, the easy rhythm we had built together. Henry's visit had reminded me of all the struggles I'd faced and overcome, but more importantly, it made me realize just how much better life had become.